Dick stared at me. He stood up, and a body wave of heat came off him. It altered the light in the room. At that moment, I would have testified to the existence of the human aura. His was 3 shades of red. With all I had been taught about hand combat in the last year, there was right now so little I knew in comparison to him. If he decided to hit me, he would. The only question was whether he would. If we die in violence, does a demon come to greet us in the same red light? Now, and I may as well testify to this, the light ebbed to green, a dull and burned-out green. The air felt scorched. I heard a voice stirring in Butler's throat before speech came out. "Are you telling me that I've been out of line?" "Yes," I said. "And owe your friends an apology?" "Yes." "Tell it to me again," he said. I hardly knew if this was a challenge or a request to save him some fraction of face. "Dix, I think you owe my friends an apology," I said. He turned to them. "I'm sorry," he stated. "I beg the pardon of Mr. and Mrs. McCann. I was out of line." "It's all right," said Fred. "Grievously out of line." "It's accepted," said Buddy Bailey McCann. He nodded. I thought he was going to salute. Then he grabbed me by the arm. "Let's get out of here." He called to Maria, put their drinks on my tab, and propelled me toward the door. I had a last clipped vision of Ingrid looking at me with wise and tender concern. I cannot count how many alleys we traversed. The ghosts of long-gone buildings rose out of every bombed-out plot. Here and there was a light in a window. In some schoolboy year, I might have brooded with adolescent melancholy on the life to be revealed in each such room. A couple fighting, a child ill, a man and a woman making love. But now in this hooded city of sewers and empty spaces, where intelligence was forever for sale, I saw instead behind each illumined window shade an agent in transaction with another agent, BND with SSD, SSD with KGB, and there in the far building to the left with its one light, was that a safe house which belonged to us? I do not know if the emanations of the dead had altogether ceased to stir beneath the Berlin rubble, but I had never been more aware of the bones compacted in this city. Butler did not say a word. Walking along at his quick pace, I felt him coming to some decision. But what it was I had no idea until I recognized that our route was coming about, and we were returning in a long circle to the Kurfürstendamm. I now felt tied to him in all the protocols of violence. He would not injure me provided I accompanied him, but I must convoy him through the night. 6 or 8 blocks from the lights of the Kudamm, he turned into another alley. "Let's look up one of my sources," he said. He spoke beneath a street lamp, and there was a smile on his face I did not like, as if the first of my payments had commenced. It was the most peculiar smile, evil, I thought, yet he had never looked so young. "Get set," he muttered, and banged on a heavy wrought-iron gate in the wall of a small building. A doorman in a black leather overcoat and a black leather cap came out of a room on one side of a short arched tunnel behind the gate, took a look at Butler, slid the latch, and opened the door to a passageway on the other side of the arched tunnel. The doorman did not look happy to see Butler. We walked down some stairs to an empty cellar room, crossed it, opened another door, and were in a bar. It was the way I had envisioned it would be if I ever got into night combat. You might be running across a dark field, and then all the world would come to light at once. Men in every kind of costume were walking around. Some were flushed, some were pale, and many were sweating profusely. More than half were stripped to the waist, and a few were walking around in a jockstrap and boots. The odor of ammonia was everywhere, harsh, sour, and fierce as disinfectant. I thought a bottle of Lysol had broken, but the smell had too many properties of the flesh. The odor, I realized, was urine. The presence of urine prevailed. It stood in puddles on the floor and in a gutter at the end of the bar. Beyond was a wooden rack, and 2 naked men about 5 feet apart were pinioned there. A fat German in an undershirt, his pants hanging low by his suspenders, his fly open, was urinating over one of the men. It was a long urination. The man in the undershirt had a cigar in his mouth and a half-gallon of beer in one hand, his penis in the other. The flush of a heavenly sunset was on his face. He urinated upon the body and face of the fellow at one end of the rack, as if he were watering every flower in the garden. Then he stepped back to give a little bow to the sounds of approval from those who watched. 2 other men came forward, each to urinate in concert on the other naked man. I could not cease looking at the 2 humans harnessed to that frame. The first was a wretch, ugly, scrawny, and craven. He winced as the fat man pissed on him. He shivered. He trembled. He closed his mouth and ground his teeth as his lips were deluged. But then, doomed to betray himself, he suddenly gaped his mouth open, drank, sputtered, choked, began to sob, began to snicker, and to my horror aroused a feeling of cruelty in myself, as if he were supposed to be there for urinating upon. His partner, equally in bonds, did not look like a wretch, but a creature. Caught in the cross streams of 2 dark, intent young Germans, who appeared to be sharing one black leather costume, since the first wore nothing but the jacket, and the second the pants, this other naked figure was blond and blue-eyed, with a cupid's mouth and a deep cleft in his chin. His skin was so white that his ankles and wrists chafed in his bonds. He gazed at the ceiling. He seemed delivered from all the people who pissed on him. I felt as if he lived in that place where humiliation had ceased to exist. Something of the tender concern Ingrid had bestowed in her last look on me now came forward in my drunken stirrings. I wished to wipe this young man off and set him free. Or at least I had such thoughts until I came back to myself long enough to recognize that this cellar existed. It actually did exist. I was not alone in some theater of my mind. In the next moment, I was full of the panic to flee. I felt as if I must, absolutely must, decamp from here, and immediately. But even as I looked for Dix, he came into view beside the male couple, who formed the complementary halves of the one black leather outfit, moved them 2 feet to the side by the fact of his presence, unzipped his fly, and urinated on the blond boy's thighs and calves without spleen or lust, like a bored priest whose fingers have ceased to feel the imminence of the holy water. Then Dix's presence intimidating the German couple to put up their waters altogether, he now bent forward, watchful that neither his body nor his clothing touched the blond boy, and whispered in his ear, inclined his own ear to listen, and when there was no reply, the creature off in some rapture of the pits, Dix slapped him professionally once, then twice, repeated his question, and when there was still no answer, said, "Next time I'll fry your ass, Wolfgang," and stepped away, walking like a show horse between the puddles, hitched a thumb at me, and we departed. "Damned, drug-assed bastard," he said as we hit the air. "Totally senseless tonight." "You know him?" I asked. "Of course. He's my agent." Some part of me was ready to ask more questions, but I could not go on. I felt as if I had taken a bad fall. "I didn't believe what I saw," came out in a hoarse little croak. He began to laugh. His mirth echoed in the small canyon of the alley, the back of 6-story buildings close upon us from either side. We debouched into a street, and his laughter went caterwauling away from him on the wind. "The goddamn people I'm associated with," he said aloud. But if I thought he was referring to the cellar bar, his next few words removed the error. "Are we supposed to conquer the Russians with personnel like you and McCann?" "I'm not a street man," I said. "That," said Dix, "is where the war is fought." "Yes, in that bar." "Half of our agents are queer," Dix told me. "It comes with the profession." "Do you pretend to be one of them?" I found the courage to say. "I use them," he told me. We did not talk for a while. We walked. When he spoke again, he had come back to the subject. "I don't think you received my point, Herrick," he said. "Agents lead a double life. Homosexuals lead a double life. Ergo, and he picked up ergo from me, agents are often homosexuals. I would judge that homosexuals are just a small part of it. You would judge, he jeered. You choose to believe what you want to believe. What are you telling me? No blow taken in boxing at the farm had left me as numb in so many junctions of the mind. I needed a drink, but not to relax, rather to return to myself again. I was chilled in my mind, chilled in my heart, and not without the beginnings of some lively disturbance below. The nearness of sex to urine and feces seemed a monstrosity, as if some mongoloid of the devil had been there at the creation, dictating nether anatomy. The smell of drains prevalent in these nocturnal Berlin streets was in my nose. What are you telling me? I repeated. My discomfort kept shifting, as if we were playing at musical chairs and one of my better views of myself had just lost his seat. He stopped at a door, took out a key, let himself into a small walk-up apartment building. I did not care to follow, but I did. I knew where we were. It was one of our safe houses. Once inside, installed in our chairs, holding glasses of bourbon neat, he looked at me and rubbed his face. He did this slowly and carefully for several minutes, as if domiciling his temper. I've never talked to you, he said. You haven't? Not as a friend. I've merely offered facets of myself. I made no reply. I drank. It was as if I were starting to drink all over again. One difference between you and me, said Butler, is that I understand our profession. You have to be able to turn yourself inside out. I am aware of that, I said. You may be aware of it, but you cannot do it. You get stuck in the middle. Your asshole is tight. I believe I'm ready to drink up and leave. Your asshole is tight, repeated Butler. He began to laugh. Of all the times I had heard him laugh tonight, none sounded so full of warring parties to his own balance. They're crazy in this fucking company, he said. They give a polygraph test to all of us. Are you homosexual, they ask. I never met a closet homosexual who couldn't lie to a polygraph. I'll tell you what they need in this company. An initiation rite. Every junior officer trainee ought to be ordered to pull down his pants on graduation day, get his asshole reamed by a wise superior. What do you think of such a thesis? I don't believe you would submit to it yourself, I said. I've had my initiation. Didn't I tell you? My big brother used to cornhole me from the time I was 10 till I was 14. Then I knocked him down and he stopped. That's what they mean by white trash, Herrick. Now, I do not believe there is any man in the company who could stick it up me against my will. No one has the physical force. What if they had a gun? I would die first. He smiled at me. All the same, taking it up the ass out of one's own free, God-given choice may be another matter. Call it the next thing to yoga. Frees the associations. Readies you for the street. Maybe I'll never be ready for the street, I said. You dumb, smug, superior son of a bitch, he said. What if I were to push your face into the carpet and manhandle your cherry pants off your cherry ass? Do you think I'm strong enough? It was not routine to speak. I think you're strong enough, I said, and my voice was weak in my ear. But you don't want to. Why? Because I might kill you. With what? I was silent. With what? With whatever it took. How long, asked Butler, would I have to wait? Till whenever. Till I would do it. Do you know? I think you would. I nodded. I could not speak. Too much fear was in me. It was as if I had already committed murder and did not know how to escape. Yes, he said, you could shoot me in the back afterward. He pondered this. Or even in the front. I'll say that for you. You might shoot me if I took away the only thing that is yours, the poor little cherry in your asshole. I wish you had something more to hold on to. You might not be so desperate." If my father had uttered these words, they could not have been more painful. I wanted to explain that I might be better than that. I believed in honor, I wanted to tell him. Certain kinds of honor could not be lost without demanding that one consecrate oneself thereafter, no matter how unsuited and unprepared, to a life of revenge. I knew, however, that I could not express this aloud. The words would never survive in open air. "Well," he said, "maybe old Dix is not going to go in for breaking an entry. Maybe old Dix is wrong and ought to apologize." He weighed this. He weighed his glass. "I was wrong," he said. "I apologize. I apologize for the second time tonight." But he looked as intent and full of ungovernable tension as ever. He took a long swallow of his bourbon. I took a short one of mine, happy for its heat. Now Butler stood up. He undid his belt buckle, opened his pants, and stepped out of them. Then he dropped his jockey shorts. He was swollen, but without an erection. "There's two kinds of sexual behavior between men," he said. "Compulsion and a mutual regard. The second can't exist until the first is attempted. So I attempted to frighten you into putting out for me. But that wouldn't work. You made me realize it. Now I can respect you. Come," he said, and he reached forward and took my hand. "Take off your clothes. We'll do some good things to each other." When I did not move, he said, "You don't trust me, do you?" In answer to my silence, he smiled. "In that case, let me be the first." He bent over nimbly, put his fingertips to the floor and then his knees, and raised his powerful buttocks to me. "Come on, fuckhead," he said. "This is your chance. Hit it big. Come in me before I come back in you." When I still made no move, he added, "God damn it, I need it tonight. I need it bad, Harry, and I love you." "I love you too, Dix," I said, "but I can't." The worst of it was that I could. An erection had risen out of I know not what, from puddles of urine on a cellar floor, and a fat German slobbering his beer, from the buried loves of my life, from bonds of family and friends and all the muffled dreams of Kittredge, from naked-ass locker rooms packed into the constrictions of my memory. And here were two clumps of powdered meat belonging to my hero, who wanted me up his ass. Yes, I had an erection. He was right. It was my chance to hit it big. I could steal something from his strength, and knew that if I did, I might live forever on this side of sex. But he had told the truth. I was too timid to live in such a way. He could leap from woman to man to woman, on top, on bottom, or hang from his heels. He was an animal, a pagan, an explorer of caverns and columns, and I happened to be the piece of human work he wanted inside himself tonight. For what, I hardly knew. Was it a fiber from the spine of New England? Something he had missed? I felt for him. I walked around in front, knelt, kissed him on the mouth, stood up quickly, stepped to the door, unhooked the chain, and felt an obligation to turn around and look at him one more time, as if in salute. He looked back at me and nodded. He was sitting on the floor. Out in the street, wind flayed the cheeks of my face. I walked along quickly. I knew I had not gotten out unscathed. "I love you, Dix," were the words that would come back to me, and I writhed at the squalid echo they would soon acquire. Instinct took me to Die Hintertür. Stalking night streets with a full erection must have served as my vector. An empty taxi passed, and although I needed to walk on impulse, I hailed him, and thereby arrived at the nightclub just as the steel shutters were coming down, and Ingrid, small pocketbook held in one of her square hands, short and ratty fur coat on her shoulders, was shivering on the curb in the 4 a.m. winds. Without a tremor of hesitation, and the most perfect smile on her face, as if this coincidence of our meeting were but the first note in a romantic symphony whose composer could only be Herr History. She came right into the cab, gave an address, sat back against me, and offered the full seal of her lips to mine. I was all over her in the back of the cab, and could not stop kissing. "Oh," she kept saying in some mixture of English and German, "maybe you love me more than a little," and the repetition of ein bisschen, so much like ambition, kept one small part of me in a state of standoff amusement, while the rest was taking in the iron-corded fatigue of her legs and shoulders after a night of dancing, absorbing all her pent energy, good and ill, into my fingers and my hands. We were necking and petting and gripping and grabbing and nipping one another like two exercise machines set loose upon one another. Since my education into the interstices, locks, and patents of a girdle was only now commencing at the age of 23, Ingrid may have been slim, but she was German. In consequence, she wore a girdle. I was making frantic calculations whether to mount some central attack in the back of this cab or to countermand the address she had given and take her to my apartment, my bed, and the inevitable waking up in the morning to the hungover embarrassment of having to stumble through the cover names of my fellow CIA men. Already I could hear their guarded good morning while they debated the dubious wisdom of bringing in this outside source female and sitting her down en famille at the linoleum-covered breakfast table. I was still running such calculations through the decision mill of my Bourbonified brain when we pulled up at the address she had given to the cab driver, and it was an all-night, after-hours bar and food mill in full view of the street 2 blocks off the other end of the Kurfürstendamm. In that place I quickly received one more education on Berlin and its nightlife. Half the people in this place were familiar to me. I'd seen them in one nightclub or another over the last week. Now they were having coffee and American hamburgers, or schnapps, or cognac, or beer, or pig's knuckles and sauerkraut, or applesauce and potato pancake, or gin and tonic, or Coca-Cola, or patisserie, or pastrami, or roast duck. A hell of an unlikely place, and brightly lit. I saw again some of the starch businessmen who had been dancing at Remedies and the bathtub and the couch. Their collars wilted now. Prostitutes who were familiar, plus a few of the all-night divorcees like Helga were there. And to my disbelief, nothing less than the fat German I had seen not more than an hour ago, whose pants had hung from his suspenders. He was neatly powdered now, having gone, I suppose, to just the kind of all-night barber shop that would complement this all-night emporium of food and drink. And indeed, in the next moment, I saw the wretch. He, too, was bathed and powdered. Dressed in a gray suit and vest, he wore steel-rimmed spectacles and looked like a clerk with spavined cheeks and a large appetite. He was devouring a plate of beans. Ingrid, all the while, was hugging her fur coat and my body as one, proclaiming to everyone who watched that she had bagged an American. Ingrid was also eating an enormous grilled American of Westphalian ham, tomatoes, and Munster cheese. I sat beside her in twitchy detumescence, while she slogged down a vast mug of beer, thereby communicating to me in 20 minutes how profoundly one might, over 20 years, come to dislike the eating habits of a mate. Poor Ingrid. She was hard-working and half-starved, and the back door, as she put it to me with a toothsome grin, never allowed their help enough of food and drink to produce more than a goat turd for the other back door. On this night, therefore, in which my own sphincter had almost played a prominent role, insight came over me at last. I was in the presence of German humor. Die Hintertour. I got it. A nightclub for assholes. She finished her meal. We found cabs waiting outside. We took one to another address she gave. It proved to be a cavernous cheap hotel in another bombed-out working-class quarter of Tempelhof, and the night clerk took an unconscionable time studying my passport and hers, and finally returned Ingrid's with a muttered German insult I could not catch. I begged her to explain, and in the rise of the self-service elevator, which took us up at a creak and a hitch past one plaster-dusted floor after another, she managed to translate. American whore, bitch, fucker was something like how it went. But if there is a universal harmonium of consonants and vowels, it certainly sounded worse in German. It affected her mood. We came to our floor and walked down an echoing, cavernous hall. She took the key, whose prominent handle was the size of a phallus itself, and opened the door to a room as cold and damp as the night outside. The overhead bulb in the ceiling may have offered 25 watts. One standing lamp offered another such bulb, and the bed presented a coverlet in the full palette of entropy that may be described as not brown, not gray, not green, and it was long enough to wrap around a bolster as heavy as a rolled-up rug. We started to kiss again, but with less fever, and she shivered. "You have 2 Marken?" she asked. When I found a coin, she put it into a gas meter, came back to me for matches, lit it, and stood by a fire that came up in a blue whispering flambeau behind artificial logs. I felt the weight of the city. All of Berlin was now contained for me in the image of a gargoyle straining to move up a slope. No originality at this hour. And then I embraced her again, and we shivered with that side of our bodies which was not toasted by the fire. I did not know how to proceed. The girdle seemed more formidable than ever. Sobering up, I was all too near to nothing at all but my erection. Holy prime factor was intact. It had been waiting for years. I felt as if all of my long-dead family Hubbards were gathering about. In this ghostly room, so much more suited for laying out a corpse than lying on a living body, a filament of desire rolled around in me, hot and isolated as a wire in a heating coil. Yet it must have warmed some minimal ardor in her, because now she was kissing me back, and after a moment, with a muted reluctance as grave and stately as a formal procession, we moved the 4 steps to the bed, and she lay down on the edge of it, gave presto a few deft snips and snaps to the yoke of the girdle, unhooked her garters, so that each falling stocking inspired one more thin filament of desire, these unkempt stockings reminiscent of a pornographic daguerreotype Kirke 1885 that had lain all through my boyhood in some old tin box of my father's up in Maine. Maybe my father had guarded it through his childhood. One more family log to throw on the fire. By the light of the 25-watt bulbs, I saw revealed, without preliminary, my first vagina. As if I were robbing a house and did not wish to tarry, I opened my pants, to which she gave a grunt of pleasure at the readiness of my erection. I, however, taking another look at that repository of female secrets, was tempted to drop to my knees and pay homage until my eyes were sated of their formidable curiosity. But, child of good decorum, I did not really dare to look too long, and was certainly afraid of this vagina's superior relation, what with all its folds and recesses, to secrets of human state I could not even contemplate. Therefore I placed the head of my cock where I thought it should go, shoved, only to hear another grunt, now of reproach, on which she took me by her hand, and guiding me with 2 deft fingers, put her hand against my chest as I started to plunge. "No, Harry, verwundbar, I'm sore. Go easy, go easy. You are mein Schatz, liebste Schatz, soldier boy." And she opened her brassiere, which had a catch at the front I had never thought to look for. At the sight of those breasts, which were a little depleted, but all the same breasts, the first naked ones ever seen so near to me, I plunged and came back, and plunged again, and had a picture, as I now entered the land of sex, where far-off universes of the mind will, I suppose, implode, had, yes, a picture of Alan Dulles talking before us on the day of our initiation about a girl on a tennis court. Then I plunged and came back and plunged again, and realized I was inside a cunt. It was another world, and all at once. The inside of her belly was one's first station in heaven, but another part of me was offended. What mean auspices! What a foul initiation! I hardly liked our odors in this stale, cold room. A thin, avaricious smell certainly came up from her, single-minded as a cat, weary as some sad putrescence of the sea. So I hovered between, half a lover entering the hypnotism of love, and half an onlooker doomed to observe myself in the act of love. On I sawed, back and forth. Soon she was moist and did not wince each time I plunged. Or was it that she winced less? I must have made love at ferocious speed, because the powers of displeasure were certainly growing. This wretched room, and yes, this poor and hungry girl who loved me from the outside first, America first. I moved in two worlds at once, in pleasure and in lack of pleasure, and the two kept me moving. I did not dare to stop, or all erection could be gone. Then there came a few minutes when the sweat stood on my neck. In this chill, half-heated icebox of a chamber, standing, feet on the floor, while a strange young woman was laid out before me on the bed. No heat gathered in my loins. I was lost in a perpetual motion machine. I was in the purgatory of desire, and I humped and I pumped beneath a pall, on and on until the image of Butler's knotted buttocks came back to me again, and the perpetual motion machine staggered, took a loop, then a leap, and the filaments of heat began to resolve in me, and my body to quake with the onset of the irreversible. Pictures of her vagina flickered in my brain next to images of his ass, and I started to come, and continued to come from the separate halves of me, and had a glimpse of the endless fall that may yet be found on our way into the Beatitudes. We shared a cigarette. I was feeling a good bit better now. Achievement was my portion. Gloom might still reside in the outer reaches, but half the world was better than none. I adored Ingrid and did not feel a thing for her. At the end, I had been all alone in myself. Now she nuzzled my nose with her fingertip as if we were newlyweds, and she was examining the features to face her in years to come. Then she spoke. Tomorrow at work, she would inform Maria. That was the sum of her first speech. Ingrid was filing territorial rights. What will you tell her? I asked. Maria in secret was my preference, and it occurred to me that if Ingrid spoke well of this night, perhaps Maria would take another look. If she asks, I will say, and she intoned the next words with special clarity, schwerer Arbeiter, aber süßer, and Ingrid offered a kiss. It did not seem to me that the mysterious Maria would be particularly intrigued by a hard worker who was sweet. The dawn was coming at the window. Ingrid would now go back to her husband, to her child, her mother, her brothers, and her cousins, and I would have time to change, take a bath, and go to work.